Welcome, everybody, to another one of my interviews. I am really blessed today. I don't know. I've done about 50 of these interviews by now, and all my guests have been great. But tonight and we are taping at night, is kind of special because I have Dr. Cyril O'Regan from the University of Notre Dame. And Cyril is smarter than I am by several orders of magnitude. And so it's great to, as I always used to tell students, who they would come to my office. Oh, you're so smart, Dr. Chapp. You know so much. And I would say, yeah, don't feel stupid. The thing in life is that no matter how intelligent and educated you might become, there will come a time when you will be around somebody who makes you feel profoundly stupid and uneducated and a complete moron. That's kind of the way I felt when I first met David L. Schindler. And I'm not saying that you make me feel like a moron, but you are by orders of magnitude more educated than I am. And so I'm really happy to have you. So this is Dr. Cyril O'Regan. My colleague, Dr. Rodney Howsare, is also with me this evening. And actually, Rodney knows more about Cyril's theology and philosophy than I do. And we'll get to that in a second. But Dr. O'Regan teaches at the University of Notre Dame. He's the Catherine F. Husking Professor of Theology. There, his primary field of study is systematic theology, secondary is history of Christianity. Dr. O'Regan got his PhD at Yale University, and where he actually taught for a while in the religious studies department before he came to Notre Dame in 1999. His work spans a number of areas: systematic theology, historical theology, and continental philosophy, which I'm always very interested in. And he's done considerable work in 19th century theology and philosophy, postmodern thought, mysticism, apocalyptic, Gnosticism, religion and literature, major Catholic figures such as Newman, de Lubac, Hans from Balthasar, Benedict XVI, and doctrines of Trinity and the last things. And he's shortly going to complete 2 volumes dealing with the relationship between Balthasar and Heidegger. He's then going to return to his Gnosticism and Modernity project, and he intends to write a volume on Gnosticism and German idealism, and then a volume on Gnosticism and German and English Romanticism, among other things. All right, his books include The Heterodox Hegel, which I've read, The Gnostic Return in Modernity, which I've read, and then Gnostic Apocalypse, Jacob Boehm's Haunted Narrative, Theology and Spaces of Apocalyptic, and then The Anatomy of Misremembering, Balthasar's Response to Philosophical Modernity. And I'm ashamed. I've always wanted to read that text. I never had, although I have heard you speak on it. Anyway, so that, and I'm sure I'm only scratching the surface of the many papers and articles and reviews and so on that Dr. O'Regan. So I hope my viewers then understand why it is I'm so very pleased to host Dr. O'Regan tonight. And of course, my viewers know Dr. Rodney Howsare, chair of the Department of Theology at DeSales University, and I am more intelligent than he is by several orders of magnitude. That's not true. That's not true. But I think we're brothers by a different mother, actually. So anyway, I hate YouTube videos that begin with a lot of BS and banter. So let's get right to it. Shall we? And then and Howsare, you jump in whenever you want, and Dr. O'Regan, just jump in whenever you want. And from here on out, too, I'm going to forego formalities. I'll refer to Dr. Howsare as Rodney and Dr. O'Regan as Cyril if he does not mind. All right. Now, I'm going to start off with a very a basic question. One of the things that has always interested me is ressourcement theologie, or sometimes called the Nouvelle Theologie. And Dr. O'Regan, Cyril, writes quite a bit in Church Life Journal, which is also published at the University of Notre Dame. And there's been several articles of his that are very interesting. But one caught my eye that just came to my attention recently that he wrote in 2019, Cyril, on the Nouvelle Theologie and its sort of ongoing project. And one of the things that really struck me as interesting was you framed the conversation along the lines of Charles Taylor's Secular Age and his claim that we live in an immanent frame, and therefore pre-modern forms of religion, Catholicism included, just aren't going to fly today in so many words. But that there is a sort of second wave of modernity that then creates a kind of religiosity that lives within that immanent frame. and you say that the project of Nouvelle Theologie is to, in a sense, remember the past properly, to, in a sense, fight the misremembering of the past, and thereby retrieve ancient figures, not slavishly, to simply exposit them, but to show their ongoing relevance for today, for helping us to break out of the immanent frame. Am I getting this right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so could you please just sort of riff on that, comment on that a little bit? Why do you think that is so significant, and what is the state of this ongoing project?
Okay, so let me start with Charles Taylor as a kind of lens which wants to be hospitable, but may not turn out to be quite hospitable towards Christianity as some of us would desire, and that would include myself. But the first thing I think we need when sort of we're talking about theologians who are interested in modernity is to kind of establish sort of what framework are we talking about? What sort of are the layers of, or the development of discourses in modernity, which cumulatively or singly are going to have some kind of impact upon sort of theology, and for the most part, I'm thinking of negative impact on theology. So it would be the case that Taylor is going to suggest that the entire evolution of modernity will tend to be some form of selection / displacement of historical forms of Christianity. So the Reformation is a kind of internal revolution within Christianity. But that internal revolution opens out sort of on a modernity, which to some extent sort of it is and is not a cause. But in due course, some sort of the mantras which are intramural to Christianity, about each person is before God, each person has their conscience, each person is affrighted by God, and so forth. So we all have equal access, and therefore we can sort of sideline institutions with respect to that. That comes in due course to be an Enlightenment principle. Each of us should be allowed to have his or her own opinion on important matters. Religion obviously is included in those important matters. And any attempt sort of to foreclose, to dampen us having the right to have an opinion, while of course there is no kind of norm with respect to, is there any conditions of the possibility, are there certain criteria you need to pass in order to actually sort of be taken seriously about having an opinion and so forth. Now, all that's bypassed, and we simply have the abstraction that each of us has their own opinion. Those opinions will in due course come into conflict, and we need sort of some kind of referee. The state will function as a referee, and the state will function therapeutically, whereby sort of the state can reconcile us, but we also will have to learn some other kind of habits. That means we shouldn't be obscurantists, we shouldn't be fanatical, and obviously we shouldn't sort of go the realm of violence. We could stop there. In other words, that, all right, we can now think that somehow or other the Reformation is implicated with respect to an aspect of modernity. That aspect sort of which most of us know fairly well. The aspect which has got to do sort of with reason sort of now seems to be sort of preeminent. Reason has the right not simply to negotiate with fate, it has the right sort of to wipe it out, essentially. It has the right to overrule it. And so the Enlightenment, or the various forms of the Enlightenment, and there is no one Enlightenment or one size fits all. That is, we got the English Enlightenment, we got the French Enlightenment, we got the German Enlightenment, and these have different textures and different valences. I can bring them out in due course, but just simply I want to stipulate that isn't one thing, it's a combination of things. Sometimes we stop when we're talking about how is Christianity going to survive in the modern world, or we want to itemize the various ways in which it has got attacked. We just tend to think, okay, that really what we're talking about is modernity is the Enlightenment.
Right.
And for certain purposes, I think that does okay, because obviously we have the rise of the authority of science. We have the demand, so there's no for rational explanation. And when one says, well, various kind of Christian beliefs, so there's no, well, they're not going to be reason from the ground up. We'll use reason to elucidate something, but not to construct something. that generally sort of, if you're a really Enlightenment person, that sort of is not really kosher and so forth. You can get criticized. But there is the optical illusion, and here is, I think, where Taylor helps. That is that all we would ever be talking about of various modulations of the Enlightenment and the way in which it puts Christianity and the various forms of Christianity on their back foot. But that's not entirely what he means, and I think what he means is important. Modernity sort of is the Enlightenment and various forms of Enlightenment, plus all the attempts to correct for the Enlightenment without going back sort of to kind of pre-modern mentality where we have faith and reason together. That is, that all the other things that happened in the 19th century. What would I mean by that? Well, I think Romanticism, idealism, Nietzscheanism, all of these particular conjugations, philosophical vitalism, Romanticism, which is going to suggest that kind of out of the impoverished view of human being that the Enlightenment is going to propose to us in lieu of a religious subject. What's going to happen is Romanticism is going to suggest English and German. Well, that's a very impoverished view of human being. We agree with you that we want autonomy. We agree with you with respect to critique of Christianity, but we don't agree with you with respect to what the capabilities or capacities of human beings are. Moreover, we don't agree with you that there is no that we have to foreclose talk about the divine. We can and should talk about the divine, but of course we shouldn't talk about the personal gods of Judeo-Christianity. So it's these kind of internal, what I call in modernity. Modernity is constituted by these various forms of enlightenment and the ways in which so that then we have these kind of corrective capacities. Romanticism is one. German idealism sort of is cognate, I think, to Romanticism in the sense that in a philosophical idiom, it's going to, I think, produce some of the same kind of corrections without ever forswearing the Enlightenment. That is, German idealism will also be critiquing standard forms of Christianity. We don't, in fact, we're not going to vouchsafe a notion of God created the world.
Can I interrupt one second, just one second, to go back to your thing about without forswearing the Enlightenment. Obviously, they're not agreeing with all aspects of the Enlightenment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be throwing themselves as a kind of corrective. So when you say not forswearing the Enlightenment, do you simply mean a kind of abstraction that they have in their head of the Enlightenment as the repudiation of pre-modernity? Or what exactly do you mean when you say they won't forswear the Enlightenment as such?
They won't forswear the Enlightenment as such. I mean, probably on any number of grounds, but the most important one for us is, will they forswear the critiques of Enlightenment and pre-Reformation Christianity? Right. Yeah, they will not forswear those critiques. In other words, they begin with those critiques and then say, well, yes, all those were fine. So everything you said negatively, we are going to agree with. What you said positively, however, either isn't enough or is problematic.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I interrupted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're not interrupting. It's part of the question, and the clarification, I think, is good. So, for instance, if you replace a Christian notion of creation, which is, yes, God created the world, but God is also present in the world, and then you replace that by an Enlightenment view that a divine something or other created the world, there's nothing more needs to be said. There's no kind of way in which God, having created the world, that God is going to do any more work with respect to you understanding the nature of human being or the nature of the cosmos. In other words, there's going to be you can allow a transcendent God, but this transcendent God now is a kind of remainder concept. That is, we're not prepared to remove it, but it's no longer going to do any kind of work whatsoever. That is, we can say simultaneously, which we used to be able to say simultaneously, that, shall we say, the maximum of transcendence when we're talking about God is also compatible with the maximum of immanence of God, right? We can't say that. God is there. God is relatively idle. God is not necessarily in the world. God does not necessarily preserve at every moment in the world. So every moment in the world of creation is a miracle, by perdurance itself. All that sort of is simply, we got rid of that. But as we got rid of that, then we're going to have some problems. That is, the critique of religion is fine, because religion sort of is kind of stupid at best, and it's noxious. It's noxious at worst, right? So it simply enslaves human beings, and human beings can't be sort of the kind of free beings that they're supposed to be. But what we have lost then is we've lost any sense in which, God talk could do any work other than God talk. That is, we kind of have a presupposition sort of that as we do exist, the world exists, therefore something must have caused it, and we're lazy enough to just simply allow it. And for the most part, with the exception sort of the French Enlightenment, which gradually and did the whole sort of the whole back and so forth, is going to turn out to be atheistic. For the most part, there is this congeniality. We'll continue to have sort of vacuous God talk. So we'll allow vacuous God talk, as long as it doesn't do any work, we're okay. The Romantics and the German idealists see that is not going to suffice. Mm-hmm. That is, that if it's the case of God is doing no work, who are we? I mean, clearly clearly none of us is we can't. How do we assign our worth? Clearly, we're fallible. Clearly, we have our own stupidities if they're not in fact kind of given to us by religion. So, what in fact are our capacities? So we say we've moved away from anxiety with respect to am I saved, but we're not removed from the anxiety with respect to what can I be, what can we be,
right?
What is our limit? Is our limit a kind of groveling finitude, of moral weakness, shall we say? That might be an analysis. So if you're, shall we say, a political scientist, that might be a way of a kind of Hobbesian indexing of who we are. But the Romantics don't think that. The Romantics are hyperbolists. That is, who we are at to the degree to which we're going to think about ourselves, who could we be, and what's the maximum we could be. And all of a sudden then, what you get is the divine is not necessarily God. And it's very interesting. Divinity is an abstraction. God is not intended as an abstraction. Divinity then means that it's a free radical. So that free radical can be a free radical that I can have a commercium or commerce with divinity, in which to some extent, the commerce with the divinity doesn't mean simply I participate in it, because it's a free radical. I mean, I am it. And German idealism is going to make that a claim as well. Yeah. We can say that the divinity is a free radical with respect to the cosmos. That is, we could say, there's this interesting relationship between divinity and the cosmos. But of course, the divinity itself is so ambiguous that we can't say that it isn't, in fact, coterminous or coeval with the cosmos. In other words, the cosmos too, or there is something in the cosmos that's not reducible to matter, not reducible to Descartes' res extensa. And that which is not reducible to res extensa, to the degree to which we want to continue to have divinity talk, we can then subscribe to the view. Wordsworth did it, Thoreau will do it, Emerson will do it, and so forth. So we've got kind of the North American counterparts of what starts happening in England, and will continue most of English Romanticism, and is indicated by German Romanticism. That gives you kind of one way in which we have a correction. And when you think of the 21st century, it isn't that everyone is walking around, shall we say, as a Lockean or a Cartesian, although we have plenty of Lockeans. They're numerous. Lockeans are numerous. But we also have people who think, well, perhaps we should have more than that. Perhaps we should have a creation spirituality. Perhaps, even though I'm kind of dispossessed of a transcendent God in my life, I'm not possessed of something that's divine or quasi-divine. Perhaps that's what is going to be found in the cosmos. Perhaps that's what's going to be executed in the way in which I comport myself towards that cosmos and so forth. So we can have an ecology or a depth ecology, etc. And to some extent, you can even understand that some later German philosophy, and Heidegger in some moves, begins to look a little bit like that. So the genius of Taylor, which I think is I think he is being intellectually responsible, is that he's going to kind of curve all these things back. So Romanticism is curved back into, it's not an aspect of modernity. So modernity now is plural, but also also, shall we say, it's involuted because it loops back into other things. It's not just the Enlightenment, shall we say, is not forsworn, but it gets ramified, it gets corrected. And the same thing, I think, with the vitalism of Nietzsche, sort of, and other vitalists who are sort of not in the same intellectual stature as them, that will also have to get curved back in. This means that the modernity, which is imminent, or sort of immanentist, is far more complicated than sort of sometimes or others Christian theologians who have read a little bit about Descartes and a little bit about attacks against Christianity think. That is, we have alternatives which look religious but are not confessional. And part of the difficulty, therefore, of Christian theologians dealing with modernity is we're not just dealing with the Enlightenment, even the complexity of the various Enlightenments. We're also dealing with all these other curving back of discourses, all of which manifest the immanent frame. And we could even say, because German idealism and Romanticism and Nietzsche are all critical in significant respects of it, without necessarily, as I said, forswearing the Enlightenment attacks against Christianity. They're all going to agree on that. In an odd kind of way, it ends up protecting modernity, because modernity now, you see, is not an easy target. There are all these different aspects. So you attack the Enlightenment. Well, Enlightenment, there are other things in modernity, right, sort of which are not totally lined up sort of with conventional forms of Christianity. Right. And they say other things which seem to be more hospitable with respect to Christianity. But what I would say is, and I would use a term by Jacques Derrida, all these corrections of the initial form of modernity in and through the Enlightenment and various forms of the Enlightenment are a kind of auto-immunization. They protect modernity because it makes modernity much more difficult to deal with, because these other discourses, which are precisely not Christian, have already critiqued it. So now what is your task? Your task is now has multiplied in complexity. Yeah. And there are going to be elements, therefore, sort of this second wave of modernity that are going to counterfeit, in some sense, that which we got in Christianity. So, for instance, we're going to get some element of human exaltation. Once upon a time, that might have been called sanctification or deification. Now we get it outside that particular theological context, etc. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow.
Go ahead.
So what I would say, getting back to the more basic things then. So, and I'm kind of just slightly shifting into gear with respect to ressourcement theologians. I think one of the most interesting things about ressourcement theologians, and for the moment we'll just simply kind of deal with the Lubac and Hans-Urs von Balthasar. That's not a bad pair anyway, but I don't want
those are the two you dealt with in the article that I read.
These are the two I want to continue.
And they're my two favorite anyway, so I have a prejudice here.
So let's stipulate, I won't talk, but let's stipulate, of course, that ressourcement theologians are not always and everywhere anxious about modernity, right? So in other words, that one of the tasks for a ressourcement theologian is given in the title. That is, you think sort of that to the degree to which Christian theology has somehow or other been tunneled into one particular version of a theological method, and been tunneled into one particular exemplar of a theological method and so forth. Ressourcement theologians, by and large, and even non-ressourcement theologians in the 20th century, are going to ask sort of, for a greater theological pluralism. That is, that the tradition itself has been highly unutilized or underutilized. So this would be sort of, let's say most simply, that we get St. Thomas Aquinas, and then we might say, well, Thomas Aquinas sums up all of Augustine. Or we might go further. Thomas Aquinas sums up both East and West sort of patristic fathers. And of course, we might be able to claim that Thomas Aquinas' genius is the genius of synthesis and the genius sort of, of being able to make decisions about where we put sort of the theological weight sort of with respect to particular questions and so forth. But I think a ressourcement theologian is not simply thinking that Thomas left things out, that we need these voices in their own voice. We need these theologians. We need to retrieve them because, among other things, they often attack theology differently. That is, they're not as interested as St. Thomas is. That let's imagine that we have a vantage point in which we can provide a synthesis. But if you think about it, and I have no problem with thinking that Thomas Aquinas with Augustine are the two not really great Western theologians. I think that the two great theologians of the Christian churches by and large. So it's not no knock against St. Thomas Aquinas. But if you think about what St. Thomas Aquinas is doing, it looks as if he's in a situation in which there's relative peace, there's relative kind of harmony with respect to what Christians believe. Yes, of course, there have been some attacks against this or that, right? So Abelard is around or had been around as a rationalist and so forth. The kind of assumption of or the bringing in of various is causing some kind of problems with respect to rationalism, etc.
Yeah.
But compared with Augustine, he has it easy. So in other words, that it isn't the case. What we can say is that Thomas Aquinas basically, so we can substitute him for Augustine, because Augustine is real time crisis, real time trauma and various traumas, real time intervention, and he has to use various forms of rhetoric at various times to try to get or try to persuade people with respect to the result that he thinks is desired.
Yeah.
Could we ever think? I mean, Thomas Aquinas doesn't have to think that way. He can look at the content and see how balanced the content is. So Thomas's genius is encyclopedic, it's judicial, but there's a context in and through which that makes sense. Clearly, in any context in Roman Catholicism, Thomas is going to make sense with respect to topics. But the idea that he's going to be able to handle, let's say, a crisis of modernity, is not the answer to the crisis of modernity, because most of the people assume in order for Thomas to thrive, they have to put that crisis aside, right? Because if you put it aside, then Thomas is going to be genial, he's going to be balanced, and so forth. But what if we have all kinds of crises? That is, that in Christian theology, it's not just simply a matter we can get a different rebalancing of things that Thomas has balanced and so forth, that we can tinker on the edges. Sometimes we are in a full-blown crisis. That is, that discourses in modernity, which were not there in Thomas's time, discourses in modernity saturate. So it's not the case. It would be great if what we could say as Christians is, over there, at least at arm's length, is modernity. Over there, there's Enlightenment. Over there are these counterfeits, religious counterfeits. No, we actually are exactly in that environment in which the walls have already been breached. They have seeped into our consciousness. So unless you're thinking that Thomas does that too, and maybe Thomas does that, but most of the people who support Thomas don't actually do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I often think that we're in Augustinian age. That is, you've got to be kind of multiverse. Yes. Your rhetoric has to be varied and so forth. And of course, you still have to do, just primary theology. That is, that not just always talk about what context we're in or situation we're in, but simply kind of do it. And won't say we ignore it, but just sometimes we might have to put it in brackets, at least put it aside just for that particular moment. But overall, I think the genius I think of Ressourcemont is, of course, it also puts it in brackets. In other words, when we think of Ressourcemont, we think of primary theological contributions. So Balthasar makes one, right? Glory to the Lord makes one with respect to theological aesthetics. Yes, of course, there's some genealogical component. But over 7 volumes, he makes it. Over the 5 volumes of Theodrama, he makes a positive theological contribution. And over, obviously, Theologic, he's going to make a contribution too. And similarly, we can say with the Lubac, whether he's writing Catholicism or whether he's writing on the church, the various things that he writes on the church, obviously all of which were very important for Vatican II. But, and here's the point, I think it not a little bit interesting that these two figures, while we think of them sort of as positive theologians, actually doing what they say they'd like to do, that is, resource, that both are genealogists of the first order. So that the Lubac, I mean, isn't it interesting? And this gets, I think, to the accuracy, only the accuracy. There's a lot of things about Charles Taylor I don't like particularly, but I think he gives us, I think, a neutral description, which seems to me to be relatively accurate. Isn't it interesting that when de Lubac, I think, is criticizing modernity, does he criticize, shall we say, the Enlightenment per se? And I would say, isn't it interesting that he doesn't? In other words, it's not as if he thinks the Enlightenment is fantastic. I think he just simply takes for granted that's a problem. So he doesn't want to be redundant. That's a problem. But like, you don't need me to say that. Well, what if you need me to say the following? What about Karl Marx? What about Nietzsche?
What about Feuerbach?
What about Feuerbach? Exactly.
Yeah.
In other words, this is a second layer. This is the layer sort of, of the kind of arrangement, the fold of persons who are extraordinarily influential, because unlike the Enlightenment, they appeal. First of all, there are elements about it which isn't solely the Enlightenment, but otherwise they also appeal to the imagination. Marx is going to appeal to the imagination so far as justice is the carrot. Justice, but also utopian view. It's not just simply, well, do justice, do the good. We've heard that sort of for quite a while, right, since Plato. But that well, who's going to be the vehicle for this justice? How can I cooperate with this vehicle, the proletariat, for justice and so forth? How can I get myself right with history? And this history sort of has a telos, maybe even a logical necessity and so forth. That's exciting, I take it. Yeah. Nietzsche is incredibly exciting. That Nietzsche is telling us that, well, you could be an underman, but you could be a superman. And all that's going to take sort of his will. But this will is not just metaphysical, as it is sort of, in the will to power. It's also this kind of idea that you can entirely construct your own story. That is, there is what Nietzsche, I think, sort of is going to make all of us hang, because the seduction that he's going to give us is that there's ways in which there are prospects of self-formation, which sort of we haven't tapped into yet. But we ought to tap into that sort of self-formation. The bourgeois Enlightenment person has no notice of it. Christianity clearly dampened it down. Oddly enough, Christianity is far more wrong than the Enlightenment, but sometimes being wrong is better sort of, than being neutral. It's wrong insofar as clearly Christianity must have some sense as to what it's doing in terms sort of morality. It's a deliberate damping down of what it must be recognizing. That is sort of that really we are sort of a will to power, and we are the will sort of for self-formation rather than the formation be given to us sort of by an institution, i.e. the church. On the Howsare case, again, I've said sort of how, in fact, sort of he is probably the biggest, well, I suppose, with de Lubac in terms of retrieving the past. And with respect to that, I make the following point. To the degree to which either you are a Christian theologian is against the various forms of the Enlightenment, or kind of is functioning as a stipulation that the Enlightenment clearly is going to be relatively noxious with respect to Christianity. I think the auspices under which that goes is forgetting. It's a will forgetting of the past. So the mantra sort of the Enlightenment is, it's not just simply it forgets, it does forget, and it wants to start anew. But it tells you precisely the same thing, right? It tells you the new rather than the ancient. It tells you sort of how it's going to displace and replace. But it goes under that in order to be who we can be, we are not really licensed. It's a mandate to forget.
Yeah.
Now, in the second phase, I've covered sort of the Lubac with respect to this. The second phase, I think, and I think that probably is the case, Howsare is better on this. But I think the Lubac sort of is hanging around there. Howsare, to to the degree to which sort of, he really is very interested in German Romanticism, and he's very interested in German idealism. He's also interested in Nietzsche as well. And all of those are regarded sort of as derailments. Mm. But in The Apocalypse of the German Soul, the 3 volumes from 37 to 39, it's quite clear sort of that these represent immanentist alternatives to Christianity, while they represent incredibly imaginative developments in, through, but also beyond the Enlightenment. And when I wrote sort of volume 1, sort of the book sort of on Balthasar and Hegel, what I was trying to get at there is that it's not just simply that, as he's sort of trying to become a theologian, a very learned German speaker, not German per se, but a German speaker, he does a kind of literary kind of rehearsal, and then eventually he gets around later rather than sooner to doing theology proper. But it is very interesting that if you read the trilogy of 15 volumes in the translation, you will discover that constantly he's involved in a debate with Hegel. Mm. And he's involved in a debate with Hegel not to show off. He has no interest in showing off. He may, in fact, by the way, do that anyway, but that's not the point.
He has no need to show off.
He has no need to show off. So why is he dealing with it? And here is where the category of misremembering comes in. There is enough, though Hegel is someone sort of for whom the Enlightenment cannot be forsworn. But certain aspects of the Enlightenment, as far as he's concerned, are short-sighted. They're going to leave sort of human beings high and dry. They're going to leave the cosmos as a res extensa and manipulable and so forth. So it can't do on its own, right? So he will continue the standard Enlightenment critique to some extent of Christianity. But what he's going to do is he's going to invent, he thinks discover, I would say invent in the standard colloquial sense, an alternate Christianity. It looks as if, in Hegel's case, we can kind of breathe, us theologians can breathe a sigh of relief. And I kind of think there must have been a communal sigh of relief in Tübingen, because almost everyone in the 60s and 70s of Tübingen, somehow or other, sort of kind of is or mastered by Hegel to a large extent. Whether sort of we're talking initially sort of about Hans Kuhn, or whether we're talking about Jürgen Moltmann or Jungel and so forth. I mean, Hegel is their guy. Now, before that, Hegel is also Balthasar's guy, but for a quite different purpose. That he's going to, from my point of view, Hegel doesn't forget the pre-modern. That it looks as if he's involved in retrieval, like Balthasar and de Lubac are involved. Therefore, he does seem to be favoring something like memory, rather than the Enlightenment, which is favoring forgetting. The question then we have is that he seems to be favoring that. What does he do? How does the memory work? So the memory works by putting in place of historical Christianity something that looks like it, but something that isn't it. So one of the things he does in this, let's say, the easiest text to read is, I suppose, his lectures on the philosophy of religion by Hegel. Mm-hmm. And we find very interesting things happening. We find a doctrine of the Trinity. We find a doctrine of creation. We find a doctrine of redemption, and we find sort of a view of Christ. We find a view sort of, of history, church, and our community at least, and we find last things. And here's the thing. Not a single one of those corresponds to anything said by a major Christian theologian in the Western or Eastern tradition. In other words, the Trinity is entirely modalist, therefore not really a trinity of persons at all. When, with respect to the Trinity, there's some recall of sort of the tradition. I mentioned, and I do not joke, when Hegel mentions previous Trinitarian thinkers, here's the entire list. Jacob Böhme, Proclus, Valentinus. It's not like as we are used to, right? We can say, well, maybe it's Luther, but Luther has a kind of economic Trinitarianism, or maybe it's Irenaeus, maybe sort of knows Augustinian. No mention of Augustine, no mention of Aquinas, no mention of Nicaea, no mention of Constantinople. Wow. We can
not even Sibelius.
Yeah. So I mean, people think so when I say sort of that, okay, Gnostic return and Hegel is sort of, the kind of crunch thing. But of course, look, he's already heroizing. When he does that, that's consistent with how he writes of ancient philosophy, in which Valentinus is regarded sort of as a major ancient philosopher with Proclus.
Wow.
I do not make it up. I'm not using a label with respect to things. But back, I think, to the topic at hand. What I would say then, the designation with respect to this is when you manufacture a counterfeit, that is, it looks as if you have all things in place. That's what would be the redress of the Enlightenment. It turns out it's the Enlightenment by other means, by a counterfeiting of Christianity, but whereby, for instance, we no longer have the self-God distinction. We no longer have the world-God distinction. We no longer have anything like the afterlife. We don't have a personal God. We certainly don't have a triune God in any strict sense. That I think sort of the reason why sort of I focus on that is the other versions of misremembering are more subtle. And so the second book or books sort of Noah Heidegger will give you another form of misremembering, which is much more haphazard. But this one is not haphazard. In fact, it's entirely systematic. This sort of is Hegel, just as he always does, and this is his genius. That is, when Hegel does something, there's nothing left out. So it's whole scale. It's a whole scale counterfeit. That is, everything that would be important about Christianity is mimicked and subverted. What Heidegger and do and others like him are going to do is they retrieve this and it will change. They retrieve that and it will change. But in between, there are other things that don't get retrieved at all. So the misremembering has a different kind of quality. That, I think, is what I mean sort of, when I talk about these two sort of in that particular article. I think I said something like that in the article, but I probably added to it.
Yeah. No, you did very well. And I mean, I feel like this is probably the easiest interview I've ever done because I feel like I can just sit back. I'm in like a master class right now because you've just in like 30 minutes beautifully summarized so much of the sort of seminal elements of your thinking that I think are great. But I do want to eventually talk to you about Gnosticism. But before I do that, I want to turn it over to Rodney. And you wanted to pursue a line of questioning with regard to apocalyptic, I know. So go ahead.
Yeah, although I'm going to do a little bit of improvisation and, sort of go off of what Cyril already played and not, play something totally different. But
okay,
so Cyril, yeah, no. So I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, I love the way you lay that out. It seems to me then that one of the dangers of post-Vatican II, sort of mainstream Western post-Vatican II theology is precisely sort of getting sucked into this, Hegelian ambit, and Marxist also to some degree, because it does seem less dangerous, right? So we're all kind of smart enough to know, that sort of we can't go down a Humean or a Voltairean sort of avenue and still be Christians or whatever, or Kantian even perhaps with the dualism between faith and reason. But these guys that are making these adjustments seem like friends, and when you start talking about sort of the signs of the times and the church kind of like sort of catching up with the modern world and stuff, these guys seem to provide a nice opportunity for doing that. But it seems to me what you're saying is that in some way Hegel is more dangerous than Voltaire. And I mean, could you say a little bit about that in the context of, say, post-Vatican II theology and things like that?
Good. That's a very good question, Rodney. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I could. Look, Voltaire is very dangerous too. And probably in a way, given our current politics or the style of our current politics, the tone of our current politics, that is that we can say anything in whatever way we want to say it. And the louder we say it, then sort of we get attention, etc. So I'd like to say that, well, we've been there with Voltaire, we've been there and done that, but we're never done with superficiality. We're never done with it. Right. So it keeps coming back, as we would say back in Ireland, like a bad penny. That is that Voltaire's level of theological intelligence is that of a sophomore. And his genius is that he's got a sophomoric wit. I often tell my students when I'm teaching Voltaire that if you want to know sort of when and where the public intellectual was invented, and all what I think sort of is the malign cargo that goes with that, or at least sort of not good cargo that goes with that, then Voltaire is your man. That is, he wasn't a good enough Leibnizian philosopher, which he tried his hand at and failed dismally. But he was a satirist, and he knew, and satire, and he does two things extraordinarily well, which unfortunately so we now tend to mimic, and we also do currently extraordinarily well. We are satiric with respect to those sort of persons and or positions with which we disagree. Mm-hmm. And we now have become geniuses of moral outrage. Mm-hmm. We're morally outraged by all kinds of things. And our moral outrage means that we're not responsible, because how can you attack my moral outrage? I don't need to give you an argument for my outrage. So mm-hmm. it is inserted into the public as if sort of your outrage was public. And then you have the immunization with respect to it, so because, look, I'm angry. And your anger is the truth. And you bear no responsibility sort of with justifying sort of whether you're angry about the wrong thing or whether you're pretending to be angry, and whether anger is giving you a competitive advantage sort of in the marketplace with respect to an opinion and so forth. That's stipulated. To the degree to which sort of we're talking about high culture. So in other words, I think that what we have to do is Voltaire more influential than Hegel overall in our society? And the ways in which, let's say, a young person is going to give up on his or her Christianity. Well, often it's going to be kind of more nearly Voltaire. It's almost never Hegelian, because they wouldn't have a clue, so there's no respect to sort of how that's going to go. But theologians, however, are going to waft and raise themselves and be kind of rarefied sort of into, they want, in fact, some kind of high power intellectual pedigree in order to license, their, one standard deviation, or at least from their point of view, one standard deviation from Christianity. So you need to be at least one standard deviation in order somewhere or other to make it in the academy. I think Benedict sort of, when he went sort of from Tübingen to Erlangen, I think was having this issue. Yeah. You're going to have at least one. And of course, that's really not good enough. You need to have a couple more as well. But Hegel is going to sort of be a natural default. He is the Christian thinker, that he is the major philosopher in the modern period that seems to take on Christianity whole cloth and to make it anew. Mm-hmm. And I think that accounts for his attraction. Everyone else is going to do a bit of this, a bit of that, and so forth. So the German theologians, who obviously sort of have a sense of their own kind of philosophical tradition, is not at all, I think, so that they're going to kind of alight on him. But then the content of Hegel. So I think that does explain that there has to be one standard deviation. But here's the thing. But look, it's only one standard deviation. Therefore, isn't that okay? I satisfy this demand for originality. Of course, then you prove you're not original at all. But you satisfy that, and you can say, well, tell me where and when, so that if I'm not really faithful to the tradition, I have some kind of doctrine of the Trinity, which is, of course, entirely heterodox. Your doctrine of creation. Okay, only problem with that is that's entirely heterodox too. Doctrine of redemption, that's heterodox. Okay, so indeed you have covered everything, except everything is out of sync with what the tradition was, which seems apparently not to matter sort of quite as much as you think it ought to. Look, it doesn't mean that one has to use the vocabularies of all the previous tradition to be in sync. There's many ways of being in sync. There's some obvious ways of being out of sync, and Hegel's genius is he found all of them. And I think other theologians by and large. And so let me give you the one I think sort of who's the greatest culprit, I think, is Jürgen Moltmann. Yeah. Look, Hans Küng wrote a book sort of on Hegel, 650 pages. I got through it at some particular point. It is a kind of eulogistic book. I mean, he doesn't really have, I think, the philosophical have to be able sort of, to engage Hegel in any kind of serious philosophical way, not to mention sort of a Christian way. And after that, everything that he wrote is going to be popular in any event. So I'm going to discount that for that reason. Jung sort of is, I think, a complex theologian, and he has these Barthian moments. They're not Catholic moments, but Barthian moments, I think that will do me. I mean, I prefer Catholicism to Protestantism, but Barth is a great theologian. I mean, he's sometimes intemperate, but he's a great theologian. To the degree which Jung has those moments, I'm fine. But of course, he has many Hegelian moments too. But here's the thing. Moltmann has, at least in the early work, nothing but Hegelian moments. And the later Moltmann is still a kind of active semi-repentance with respect to Hegelianism, which never work. So, and it turns out that Moltmann has had, an extraordinarily successful career and has been read as much in Catholic theology as in Protestant theology, by and large. Yeah. I mean, whoever teaches the Trinity at any graduate level in North America will undoubtedly put Jürgen Moltmann on the course. I did. I
remember the Crucified God being standard reading.
That's right. Or Trinity in the Kingdom would be standard reading, right? So those two are the two first parts of the systematic theology over 6 volumes. So what we can do, I think, is that here we think we can satisfy all the publics. There's enough that looks like church theology, but not so much that our academic colleagues, including those who don't believe at all, but nonetheless might write about religion, that at least they're seeing that we're trying to be original. We're trying to do kind of interesting things. We can be, on the one hand, yes, we're making nods to the past, but surely, once we have Hegel on our side, we're doing things which are going to pass intellectual muster. So what we're trying to do is pass intellectual muster. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to blame anyone for trying to command Hegel, right? I spent a lot of my life commanding Hegel, but I didn't spend a lot of my life, I must command Hegel, so I'm going to come off a little bit better, than my more fusty and theological friends, who can't handle this kind of stuff. I think that it's the pedigree at the upper level. And of course, then there'll be a subsequent trickle down with respect to, okay, if you're uncomfortable, I don't know, whether I'm a Christian or not, or a Catholic or not. Well, here's a kind of option. Maybe you can have it both ways, right? But you can't have it both ways. Like, okay, I'm a Christian and I'm fully a Christian and fully enlightenment figure. That's not going to work. So you can't be Voltaire and a true believer. That's not good. But it might look easier if you're going to be Hegelian and a true believer. My view is, of course, it never was going to work. Because there's a way in which it's hard for me to understand why people are suckered into it. Because, look, Hegel's greatness, if you want to think about, is Hegel a great philosopher? Is Hegel a great philosopher that seriously deals with Christianity? I'm going to tick off both of those things. That makes him worth reading. But it's not just simply, I'm a Christian, I want to hold on to my kind of pre-Reformation Christianity. Yes, I suppose I do. But I wasn't always that way. But even when I wasn't that way, it's obvious to me, intellectual honesty demands that, okay, something which has the same name does not have the same signified. The signifiers are the same. Yeah. The signified is not the same.
Yeah.
Let me switch gears just a little bit. You mentioned before how de Lubac and Balthasar were actually very good genealogists, and you engaged in intellectual genealogies. I remember at one time in my past, I was a big fan of Louis Dupre's intellectual genealogy, Passage to Modernity. I'm not quite as enamored as I once was of that, but still, and of course, Charles Taylor and others. That brings up the question of, to me, not the legitimacy of intellectual genealogies, but so this is kind of a methodological question. What constitutes a good genealogy vis-a-vis a sort of bad one? I once knew an Orthodox priest who essentially gave me, here's how you go from the Filioque to the Holocaust in 5 easy intellectual steps. And we all know these kinds of very, very superficial is it that good ones are engaged in thick description and are multifocal, or what would you characterize as a good intellectual genealogy, Cyril?
Okay. Now, first of all, the reason why I started with Charles Taylor is that what everyone wants to say about a kind of garrulousness that I think he has, and I've heard him as well. And, sometimes I think he's made a point and he continues to make the point that he just made. Nonetheless, look, to be fair, A Secular Age is a wonderful book. It's a flawed, wonderful book, but it is a wonderful book because the description is thick enough to catch various things, various elements of what modernity is, rather than sort of to say that okay, modernity sort of is the Enlightenment and its various impacts upon sort of a kind of etherization of Christian belief and so forth. Now, someone can say that, and that is not obviously untrue, but surely things are far more complicated than that, and they are more complicated than that. So it does seem to me two things are involved. The thickness of the description, which you said, is that sort of one of the constituents? The answer to that is most certainly yes. If you have sort of a kind of, the way I would put it is that sometimes reading Heidegger's work, you've got dashes. Now, most genealogists sort of, are not going to, but that's the reductio ad absurdum, right? Plato. Then next, maybe Augustine, maybe then medievals or Scotus, Descartes, Nietzsche. But really, the dashes are what? To this is the line. And what we're talking about is this sort of like a kind of, I don't know, Moira or necessity sort of going through things. And so what we get in someone like Heidegger is, there's this kind of, though he hates notions of causation, all of a sudden his dashes are telling us this caused this, and that's all we need to know. That, I think, is reductio ad absurdum of those people who think you can give sort of a kind of thin description of sort of what sort of the phenomena which are important for you are.
Right.
The second thing I think is that you're not to assume that modernity is only one thing. And obviously, it's going to be different things in different places at different periods. So, in other words, even the Enlightenment is not, shall we say, there's the Enlightenment in England in the 17th century. So Locke is the tip, sort of. Locke is the end, sort of what's happening, sort of with Lord Sherbrooke early on, sort of in the 1600s. The French Enlightenment, sort of is the 18th century in the various forms of it, sort of Voltairean, sort of Rousseauian form, the Diderot from the Encyclopedias form, so the Halbach, a kind of atheist form. German Enlightenment is the 19th century, but in many countries in Europe, including my own in Ireland, when did the Enlightenment happen? It's post 1960. Mm. So we're not to. First of all, we think that when we're talking about an entity, that I think it's okay to kind of talk about the major figures, but what we ought to do is we ought to also talk about the differential rates of the assimilation and reception of that kind of thinking. No one sort of in Ireland before 1960 would have had a kind of Voltairean sneer. A lot of Irish will have Voltairean sneers now. I mean, it's just built into the fabric sort of critique of Roman Catholicism. For 1960, we're in the 20th century. Wow. The same thing has got to do, of course, then with these other kind of answers to the Enlightenment, etc. So we've got to assume it's complex. There is a before and after. Romanticism supposes the Enlightenment, but Romanticism in many countries, let's say in South America. So I'm a literature buff. So I might read sort of sometimes mostly in translation, but sometimes in facing pages. Portuguese poetry, Pessoa, Spanish poetry or Spanish-speaking poetry, sort of in South America. Well, the Enlightenment at that point is only happening, per se, sort of at the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, they are catching up because they're looking at various literatures, German, sort of in English and so forth. So they're having the basically romantic profiles. So something is happening all at once. Both these things now are squashed together without them being distended. You also need that. But that allows me to make a point that's even more important. That is, it's not simply that any good genealogy would have that. The other and main question is, what are we doing anyway when we do it? Suppose that we do it actually correctly. That is, we allow for all that I said, so it should allow for, which will mean there'll be no brief books on modernity. And in fact, one could even say that Charles Taylor's book, which I kind of criticize as being sort of a little bit loquacious, actually, the ultimate problem with it is it's not loquacious enough. That is, he would have to do more he'd have to give a thicker description. Well, I would say, I always remember, and this I think I sometimes think about my good friends, John Milbank and David Bentley Hart. Leave aside for the moment, we can discuss that later as to, what criticism there's made of my work with respect to genealogy of modernity and so forth. But let me just make a kind of point that I think sort of that maybe there's a question with respect to their own performance. And that would be the following. How could you possibly write a genealogy that would be thick enough and not just simply perspectival or aspectival to account sort of for how we came sort of to be who we are? Look, we can and should, I think, sort of think that some texts sort of had an extraordinary influence. And they had an extraordinary influence sometimes indirectly. That is, some people that might have come in contact with them become popular writers, and after a while they don't even, let's say, mention Locke or mention Immanuel Kant, but all of a sudden people are persuaded. Jonathan Israel has written lots of stuff, humongous books, usually about 1,100 pages, on the radical enlightenment. That is the dissemination of the radical thought of Spinoza. Now you think that's overdone, but actually it isn't overdone, because he's able to show sort of how Spinoza did in England, how Spinoza did in the Netherlands, how Spinoza did sort of in Estonia, how Spinoza did sort of in Germany, how he did in Spain and Italy and so forth. In other words, that this kind of way in which a thinker begets other thinkers, and they have their own probably particular national or perhaps idiosyncratic style, but some of the major kind of things about sort of the nature of Christianity, the nature of religion, sort of which really is a kind of piety, sort of and has no true value whatsoever. That gets widely disseminated. And of course, this happens in the 18th century. If we're talking about a couple of centuries later on again, it's no longer we're not even aware as to when we're speaking Spinocistically or not. We're not aware when we speak like Locke. We're not aware when we call sort of on autonomy. Well, Kant is the one who wrote mostly on that. How many people were kind of talking or assuming belligerently about autonomy have they remembered Immanuel Kant? I think all of that very, very, very fine-grained work is enormously helpful with respect to the. But here's the thing. No person or even a group of persons can write about even that aspect thickly enough to give an account of modernity. But what about sort of the social conditions? What about sort of, what state sort of industry sort of is Germany and VV England or Spain or vice versa and so forth? What gets opened up? So we couldn't or shouldn't fundamentally decide sort of ideas are what we're doing, because then we're saying we're doing the history of ideas. We want to say more than that. But of course, you can give sort of a thick enough description that would pass muster as this looks like a cause.
Yeah.
So let me sort of just I recall the following, which I think is very, very interesting. I remember Jean-Paul Sartre writing about Flaubert, and so the title I think is L'idiot de la famille, the idiot of the family. He writes 4 books. 4 500-page volumes, so they're over 2,000 pages. And then he finds that he needs to write a kind of methodological preface. And basically, the methodological preface is the indication of a failure. There's one figure, an author, who, over 2,000 pages, the author, not simply a whole society, he thinks that he's failed to present a sufficiently thick description that thick description will automatically account for. That is, that it will function causally. And then he has this famous line that Paul Valéry, but I think he's really thinking is Flaubert. So, but we'll use the Paul Valéry because that's actually, he just substitutes Paul Valéry. So Paul Valéry, just like Flaubert, is a petty bourgeois. Not every petty bourgeois is Paul Valéry. So I've been accused of kind of thinking I'm supplying a total view of modernity. I think, like Louis Dupré, I provide general indices with respect to modernity. I think that's what Louis, who was my teacher, I think that's what he provides. He doesn't.
That's why I brought him up, because I knew that you had a relationship with Louis.
Yeah. So I think that's what Louis provides. He provides sort of a narrative story, sort of it's a certain degree of thickness and so forth. He lacks, I think, the ability of Taylor, I think, to link things together. So we have a kind of bit of seriatim and so forth in the way we don't have with Taylor. But I understand what Louis is doing, and he's not making kind of great claims. my view is that, can I speak intelligently about modernity? Can I speak intelligently about the unfolding? Yes, I can. But I'm not supplying a theory of modernity. I am not supplying a view that all of modernity is Gnostic. It most manifestly is not.
And that is Hart's claim at the beginning of his book, right?
That's right. It manifestly is not. Here is the point I'm making. It's a much narrower point. There are going to be some forms of discourse in the misremembering category that look like they're Christian, but are not Christian, which are highly imaginative, where you feel yourself that they're highly imaginative, they're highly complex, but if you work hard enough, you're going to get something out of them. So Hegel would be an example, Heidegger would be an example too. So what I want to say is that both in the discourses of literature and discourses of philosophy, as philosophy particularly sort of relates to Christianity, only under those conditions. That is, that I'm not saying that all of modernity, it's just that you actually will find select examples, but powerful examples of what we can class in the ancient world as Gnosticism, because the way I define Gnosticism is not vaguely. That is, that it's not like Hans Jonas, who's talking about, well, there's this kind of existential tension or alienation and so forth. I am well read in the history of philosophy. I'm well read enough to know that that describes about, well, half of the thinking sort of in the ancient world. In other words, and there's nothing Gnostic about it. So most Platonists and Christian Platonists are going to be talking about alienation too. It is sort of no distinction, so that it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Well,
and Balthasar makes that point in The Christian and Anxiety. Yeah,
that's right. And look, I mean, to the way to which sort of you want to tag it that that's not sort of the optimal Christian state, then fine. But you have to remember then it's a loose label that you could actually say this kind of extreme form of ascetic Christianity, shall we say, and Balthasar sometimes says this, that also is going to have the same effect, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to say is that actually it's much more observable when you actually ask the question. First of all, you need to understand what ancient Gnosticism is. And from my point of view, ancient Gnosticism is indicated but not fully explained by Irenaeus, but it most certainly is indicated, notwithstanding the critiques of Irenaeus by any number of scholars, and notwithstanding David Bentley Hart's ignoring of Irenaeus, which essentially he does. What Irenaeus suggests is that when you're talking about Gnosticism, what you're really looking at is the way in which the biblical narrative gets reinterpreted.
Yeah.
In other words, that is public. That is, the major Gnostic texts are going to have something like, what was God like so that before the creation of the world? Why did it happen? So there is a creation. Well, did one God do it? Or is there another God who does it? Is it good? Is it bad? And so forth. And what I suggest is that ultimately what Irenaeus is suggesting is that there's a kind of what sort of is generally a plus in Christianity will generally tend to be a minus, or at least every particular aspect of the narrative will be subverted and will be given a different meaning. And I want to say that there's some discourses in modernity which actually have some kind of access to heresiological material. They don't have access, obviously, to Nag Hammadi, which didn't come in the middle of the 20th century. But Hegel has some kind of contact with it. Jacob Böhme obviously is a kind of intermediary, etc. But we observe in Hegel that he deranges or rearranges things in exactly the way a Gnostic would rearrange things.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
But I also want to say, actually, if I'm going to be classed as I give sort of an account of modernity and Gnosticism, even not, let's suppose for the moment that people have got the view that it's a much more narrow profile, looking at very influential forms of discourse like Hegelian and post-Hegelian and so forth. So that's a much narrower profile. I would want to say, look, and this I think is what I'll be after when I sort of finish up the German Idealism and Romanticism book. It's not the case that all German idealists are Gnostic. I think Hegel is. It's not the case that all romantics are Gnostic. Blake is.
Yes.
But here's the thing. The category, which is a broader category, but so it's not an account for modernity, it's got to do with things sort of returning that once upon a time we thought were done. think about this other category, it's a much broader category of Marcionism. Marcionism has got to do sort of with the way sort of in which anything got to do sort of with law, got to do with commands, got to do sort of that God is not merely the creator that we have to obey, but God sort of now is the one sort of now who indicates how we are to live our life, and that obedience is required and so forth. We know that when the of course, clearly the case of Enlightenment doesn't like that, but it's also the case that none of the Romantics like that either. That's the repetition of the Enlightenment. What they're going to do then sort of is they're going to stipulate that to the degree to which we're going to be religious, we can allow that Christ is a prophetic figure, but this Christ as a new prophetic figure obviously is a prophetic figure who sets his sights against this kind of quasi-demonic God. I mean, a classic example, sort of, which is kind of in public space, and we don't have to talk about sort of, the ugly Germans and so forth in this. We can talk about the English. Think about Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. This sort of is, shall we say, a kind of Oedipal story unfolded. That is, Prometheus is literally the Christ figure. And what is demanded in the end, in order for a human being to be all the human being can be, and to be rhyming sort of with the world and so forth, is that Jupiter, Zeus, Yahweh must be gone. There's a staged disappearance because of viciousness, malice, or sheer inutility. So that to me sort of is, of course, in one sense, sort of is a wonderful piece of literature, but it isn't only a piece of literature. It is a massive ideological statement with respect to substitution, in which, now, look at it, this is Marcionite. This is not, he doesn't go off and talk about the Trinity and give you a different version and so forth. He stipulates that anything got to do in the New Testament that might bear upon the Old Testament God, that's gone. Wow. We might be able to say some things sort of for Christianity to the degree to which, Christ is regarded sort of as a heroic prophetic figure that asking us to be all that we can be. And asking us to be in contact sort of with nature and so forth. So yes, under that condition, Christ remains. That is, an element of the New Testament is still serviceable. That tells that, or I give you one example, but I think Immanuel Kant does something similar. I would say, for instance, that when we think about sort of modernity by and large, and we think about, let's say, many of the forms of Protestant theology at the beginning sort of the 20th century, of the kind of Harnack type, of sort of a kind of liberal Protestantism. They sort of are Kantian, we could say they're Kantian, right? They owe something, and they do indeed owe something to Kant. They owe something to Schleiermacher as well, who I think is equally Marcionite. Stipulation, of course, says that we're not to be thinking about God the Father. We're not to be thinking about creation. We're to be thinking about transformation, and which figure provides us with the leeway towards transformation. And that, of course, is going to be Jesus speaking sort of for the kingdom of God. So the problem in modernity, so when David is attacking me, well, you got Gnosticism on the brain and so forth. I already said, I'm not giving you an absolute account of modernity. I'm giving you indices of return of a particular discourse. Yeah. Which already is already, but that is within a larger frame that it's vastly more, shall we say, in terms of extent, it's much more a problem. The Marcionite problem is much more vast. And what I would want to argue is that Gnosticism is only so that the limit. That is, at a certain point, Marcionism is someone's going to come along and say, well, that's okay. We've kind of been there, done that. I want to rearrange. I'm going to recollect more Christianity than, okay, we'll only stick to Jesus. Let's recollect it all and let's subvert it all. So I would say Gnosticism is liminal. The real problem with theology is that we're dealing with a Marcionite return. Nice.
That's absolutely fascinating, and it's something I've been writing about a little bit lately. I think I see it among, there's a certain amount of right-wing anti-Semitism, that protocols of the elders of Zion, the blood libel against the Jews. But it seems to me the Marcionism is largely, this neo-Marcionism is largely a problem that you find in progressive theological circles.
That's exactly the case, and that would be my point. And
Yeah.
they're the carriers or the couriers of that particular message or that particular deformation.
Yes. Now, Rodney, I've seen you were taking notes or something, writing furiously earlier, so you must have a question that you want to ask.
Well, no, I mean, I just think that's I think I would like to see an article on I haven't heard you talk about the Amarsanite thing as much, Cyril, and I would love to see something in writing about that, because I think that's absolutely sort of fascinating that it actually catches a lot more people under its umbrella than Gnosticism does, which I totally agree. I totally agree with that.
Well, does it take the form of a kind of antinomianism?
It doesn't always. It doesn't always.
Okay.
What it will generally take sort of is it'll be some kind of borderline ethical or moralistic reduction. So it's still going to obey sort of some of the Enlightenment kind of protocols, that is autonomy and so forth. But by the way, just in terms of bibliography, I do have an article in Church Life sort of on that as is, and I think this fall, I think I'm probably going to publish 2 more articles. One on Marcionism in the early Heidegger and another on Marcionism in the later Heidegger.
Wow.
So perhaps look out for those. But there is one already. There is one already out there.
Nice.
Howsare, do you have another question?
I mean, if it's going to be maybe a little bit of switch of gears, maybe not, because I think Cyril.
Well, before you ask your question, okay?
Yeah.
We're now an hour and 10 minutes in. I don't know if Cyril's getting tired. He has to.
Look, here's the thing, guys. I'm here. I'm at your service. I'm going to go on as long as you want me to go on, and after that, I have a glass of wine and kind of just forget the night.
Well, I've already had my bourbon, so I'm cool. Okay, Rodney, go ahead.
But really, take as long as you want. I don't care.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
Rodney, go ahead.
And I think these are connected, obviously, but you've written a lot about apocalyptic, which is, sort of a topic that scares off most people who want to sort of be respected in polite modern society. You've sort of, in a sense, recovered the importance of apocalyptic. And I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about why you think that's, something important to Christianity.
I have a number of different reasons for doing that. Obviously, the way in which it has been owned, sort of, by sort of, kind of right-wing sort of evangelicals, etc. So there's that. It's a provocation. I can't say it's not constitutive for me, but, I think it'd be silly for me to say sort of that, I've never sort of looked at it. So I have, but it's only that.
Yeah.
What exercises me more sort of is that, taking account of this being a kind of cultural background and how that sort of can derange things, and generally speaking, when sort of people are thinking sort of that as Christianity, much I think of what I think is Christianity, whether Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, I think simply sort of is dismissed. So that's a problem. But for me, I think the narrower problem, and the one that actually provokes me, is the following. And there's 2 elements to it. The first element is that, a kind of common narrative that Catholic Christianity only came into being because of the decline of apocalyptic. Another version of that, of course, is that it really is down sort of, because of the Constantinian sort of resolution. So either it's the 2nd century, as the 4th century, whatever. So, but in any event, the Catholic interregnum is illegitimate and illicit. Now, for the most part, of course, that sort of is a Protestant narrative with respect sort of, but sometimes I think sort of, that narrative secretes itself sort of, into Roman Catholic theology as well, and said, well, maybe I should make a biblical turn because, the institution itself sort of is, by the nature of the case, anti-apocalyptic. That it's very interesting that sometimes then sort of means that Augustine's City of God sort of is regarded by some folks, for instance, just in case we haven't got the message from these other 2 ways, Constantine on the one hand, and then sort of the 2nd century on the other. The City of God sort of is really sort of the tolling of the bells, whatever remainder there was of apocalyptic. Augustine is going to tell us that, there is really, we shouldn't be concentrating upon any end with respect to history. We can have no prognostication and so forth. We've now got the history of the church, in a history, as the church will be the raft in which not everyone will be saved, but some will be saved. And so it's not the city of God, but sort of it partly relates to. But we're in history, and history does what history does. And history is also, to some extent, sort of secular insofar as there are secular powers, which may or may not be Christian. Obviously, he's writing the text sort of, in time of the sacking of Rome and all the rest of the stuff. So that's out there too. And that seems to have an absolute authority. No one sort of wants to question that at all. And therefore, it seems that, it would be just simply a contradiction in terms for someone to say, I'm, particularly Roman Catholic and I'm apocalyptic. I remember about 15 years ago, probably sort of is as long as that, I was put on the panel of the AOR on a book by Nathan Kerr, who had been taught by Stanley Harwas. And again, there was the standard kind of thing. There was the Constantinian thing. And of course, Yoder had also done the same thing. So Yoder, the Constantinian hypothesis, the interregnum, of course, sort of is the way in which the church got derailed. We have now sort of get back to table fellowship and various other kinds of things in order sort of to rectify and become apocalyptic and wait and so forth. So a whole series, and I made the case, I wasn't even trying sort of to be particularly provocative, that I said, well, yeah, I can see that this is one form of apocalyptic. That is, it's going to be a story with respect sort of to devolution and demise, sort of original spirit, and then the recollection of it. But the recollection of it will be essentially beyond the institutional church. Now, this is done in kind of relatively significant high power theology rather than simply on the sociological side, sort of, which is the commonplace with respect to it. But I sort of brought in and said, well, of course, there is something like a Catholic apocalyptic. Mm-hmm. Well, it would be sort of like, I think, that I kind of invited my friends in, all of whom are entirely naked, into the AOR room. I think it was one of those astonishing moments that this couldn't be correct. So it wasn't as if, I didn't think that. No, it simply was unthinkable. Mm. So part of what I wanted to suggest is, no, it's not unthinkable. In the same way, I am not prepared to believe that Augustine is not an apocalyptic thinker. It's just an apocalyptic thinker otherwise. So let me just give an example of Balthasar. I think this others will kind of get at the issue. So Balthasar spends, a lot of time in the trilogy, 15 volumes, but before that, and perhaps most clearly, in the Apocalypse of the German Soul. And given that he's critiquing most of the people he's talking about, then we have to assume that apocalypse is a bad term. And he probably does mean it is a bad term. Mm-hmm. That is, that there is this vision of, and this way sort of in which a Nietzsche, a Heidegger, and a Hegel, and a Schelling, somehow or other are going to move us beyond sort of where we are. That we're going to interrupt quotidian time so that being carried up, forward and up, with respect sort of to somehow or other sort of a new way of being, a new way of seeing, a new way sort of praxis and so forth. Yeah. So is he criticizing that? Yes, he is. He's not focally interested in talking about what are the ultimate origins of that, but I'll get to that sort of a little bit later on. But when you look at the trilogy, and I'll just give you one volume so that you know where I think the story is told. So Theodrama 4, it starts out with a commentary on the Book of Revelation. Yeah, that's going to be the crucial Johannine optic with respect to the positive proposal, eschatological proposal, which is made in Volume 5, and that's a culminating proposal. So in other words, it's not, look, I'm a smart guy. I noticed, you might not have noticed, that he interprets the Book of Revelation, for about 60 pages. No, it turns out that's crucial. And the Book of Revelation is the book, of course, as we well know, is the apocalypse, obviously, of the Lamb, but also it's the apocalypse of the church, inconveniently of the church. Now, the church of it is the church of the persecuted, yes. But the church also is the church that could succumb to the temptation of confusing the Antichrist with the Christ. Mm-hmm. In other words, there are counterfeits out there. Yeah, so the job of the church is to suffer persecution if such befalls it. doesn't have to welcome it, but to suffer it because the Lamb of God provides sort of, the kind of archetype sort of your response to reality. But
can I interrupt for 1 second too?
Yes, you can.
Also, by the time the book of Revelation is written, enough time had already passed. If all Christian, the original Jesus of history and the Christian movement was a sort of failed apocalyptic movement, by the time you get to the book of Revelation, that failure should have already been obvious to most early Christians. It wouldn't have taken the Constantinian era.
That's right. And that's now to make an interesting point. When we have notices in theology as to now we want to do apocalyptic again, right? We want to move away sort of institutional church and doctrine, sort of and rules and so forth. To the degree to which sort of you're going to be biblical, not at all, you don't have much opportunity. Either you're going to say apocalypse and apocalypse now, sort of, and you're non-religious and just doing some generic apocalyptic, but you're going to have to license it some way. Obviously, you're not going to license it in through doctrine, so you have to license it in through the Bible. But it's going to be very interesting what text you're going to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Usually what's going to happen is you're going to choose other texts which are underdetermined, which, let's say, texts like 2 Thessalonians, that's pretty typical, that you're waiting on the hour. In other words, really apocalyptic is going to be folded into expectation for something major to happen. I know not what, nor do I know actually the time of it. And much of apocalyptic in the 20th century, let's say Walter Benjamin, sort of from the Jewish side, and his kind of Christian and Catholic adaptation by Johann Baptist Metz is of that type.
Mm.
But what Howsare is doing is, it's almost like you feel, and he wouldn't do this because, he's Swiss, but he wouldn't kind of put it sort of in an Irish cheeky way. Excuse me, guys. I thought, but I might be getting this wrong. I thought for us, Catholics at least, Revelation is a canonic text. So, and it clearly is the only one that announces itself as apocalyptic. So, does this not suggest that apocalypsis is carrying some content?
Mm.
And it seems to me it does carry content, and Howsare sees it.
Yeah.
It carries obviously to some extent almost Trinitarian content. It carries Christological content. It carries ecclesiological content. It carries notions of discipleship, and obviously it carries eschatology.
Mm.
So, has it got to do with Revelation is canonic, but we're embarrassed by it? So my point of view, if we're embarrassed by it, well, better get out of our embarrassment. It's canonic. So let's deal with it. I mean, you can't just simply, that's embarrassing, because there's some kind of virulence or possible kind of divine violence in the text. Well, we don't get paid to avoid, right? We have to deal with it. So Howsare does try to deal with it. But if that is going to be your text, then which is the text also for Augustine,
mm-hmm.
how can you avoid that apocalypsis? And I think Howsare is thinking this. Apocalypse, Christian/Catholic apocalypse, is, I would say, the Christian, we could use kind of George Bush language. It's the vision thing. That's what it is. It's the vision thing. It's a dramatic vision, and Howsare gets it right. He doesn't have it in Glory to the Lord. He has it there. It's exactly the right placement for it. Yeah. So he reminds, I think, what I would say, that in a very attenuated way after the fact, Benedict is, I think, recalling that as he always recalls St. Augustine. Mm. So it is not a contradiction in terms to actually think sort of that mainline Catholic theologians in the 20th and 21st century are not apocalyptic. They may also, want to say, well, we can't figure out what is going to happen and so forth. Discernment is required. Discernment is certainly required. It's always required, and certainly required where it's set to counterfeits. And you can build in so these other texts, so that, I think function as exacerbators. function as intensifiers. But the idea that you can talk about apocalyptic without ever talking about sort of the one and only text out of which defines ourselves, apocalypsis, seems, again, sort of one of the things that I think I insist on is that if you're going to be a Christian theologian, obviously my sensibility is I want to retrieve as much of the past as possible. But in the interest of intellectual honesty, that you cannot avoid and then sort of kind of hope that no one notices what you dare not deal with.
Yeah. That's good.
That's fascinating. And
just a quick follow-up, Chapp, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, just another element of apocalyptic I was thinking of as you were talking, and you kind of mentioned it kind of in passing, was the whole idea of the church on earth either sort of living up to, sort of withstanding the persecution and being true to itself and being true to Christ and all that stuff. But then there's also the possibility of serious defection to an antichrist figure who is sort of a nicer version of Christ, that makes Christianity a little easier than Christ would make it, right? So
yes, exactly.
So that's also something that I think many modern theologians sort of have this aversion to, sort of thinking that anything that's out there that's being proposed could be outside of the limits of inclusion, so to speak, right? So that you have to keep making the church tent bigger to include every sort of proposal, sort of is thoroughly anti-apocalyptic insofar as there are serious counterfeits that can be deadly, so to speak.
That's exactly right. A text sort of that Howsare refers to, I mean, he doesn't sort of explore it. And obviously, sort of von Speer sort of has been used not in this volume 4, third drama, but volume 5. So, but I don't really want to talk to that at this moment. She also is a kind of apocalyptic theologian in her own right. But a text that he refers to is a commentary on the Book of Revelation by Paul Claudel. Claudel writes a text. I think it's 1934. It may not be, but roughly that's the kind of thing comes into my head. I have read it, so it's not just simply a reference. I have read it. And he brings out more clearly, I think, than Howsare does, that the Book of Revelation, to the degree to which we're talking about Antichrist, and I think you're appropriately talking about the Antichrist, that aspect of the text has got to do sort of with the force of ideologies. That is, what is going to come with prestige. Some of those things become prestige are still kind of so far from who we are, so that we can probably resist them. But the ones sort of which touch on us more closely, and I think Hegel is one of those who touches us fairly closely. That might not be Claudel's view, but it would be my view. Then sort of what we have to do sort of is that these particular sort of forms which are pleasing, which also and are pleasing and have more cultural prestige. Look, there isn't any prestige about being a Roman Catholic. And we're all equal once we're Roman Catholic, right? We're just Catholics. That's it. So theologians may be able to do kind of stuff and so forth, but the higher order the stuff you do, the less people care in any event. So you just have to. But it is the case that there has to be, if you like, I mean, if theologians are anything at all, right? They're watchers. And Book of Revelation, they're looking for watchers. And the watchers are presumably sort of persons who have time in their hands to make intellectual judgments about whether something is a simulacrum or whether there's something genuine in it at all. But here's the thing. We don't need to invent that after a biblical text. The biblical text, if we read it properly, has already told us all of that.
Yeah.
To what extent, to go back to Balthasar, and I'm thinking of his book, Cordel oder Einfall, The Moment of Christian Witness. In some, to go back to the concept of sort of, an analysis of modernity, it often strikes me that the challenge that modernity presents to us, being as dominated by a bourgeois quotidian spirit as it is that it is actually an anti-crisis culture. In other words, if like in Cordula, Balthazar wants to point out, there's the Ernstfall moment, the crisis moment,
Right.
which is a kind of apocalyptic moment in each and every person's life where that inbreaking is going to happen, whether you want it or not. It seems to me that modernity is precisely predicated on the idea that that's nonsense. That this is exactly what we need to shield ourselves against. And move along. There's nothing to see here. Is another way of paraphrasing the sort of ethos that you see in the culture of the cul-de-sac that is modernity. What do you think of that analysis?
I think it's to the point, actually. I do think so that, our culture and some people in our culture might feel that now is crisis, or perhaps over the last 20 years it's a crisis. But I do think sort of that education is a powerful thing. It's also a powerfully stunting thing. That is that somewhere or other you get enamored sort of with your own cleverness. And I think one of the ways you get enamored with your own cleverness is that, you think you want to argue with X or Y. You want to build on X or Y. You want to develop a particular doctrine in a certain way, sort of with a little bit of pizzazz, but more or less leave it intact at the same time. So I think what we tend to do sort of is that we tend to do sort of, what I think human beings, for the most part, sort of in whatever profession they're in, that, we want to be radical, but of course, you want to be radical is precisely the most conservative thing, because as you're naming yourself, you're going to make sure so you belong to some group or other and so forth.
Right,
and when you do the kind of thing that's already sort of laid out, and that there's recognition available in the wings sort of for you if you do that. Whereas if you just simply think and try to think things true, God knows what the result is going to be. It might turn out, of course, unfortunately, you have absolutely nothing to say that's original. And so that you're a wonderful Catholic Christian, but really you have no more to say so than a kind of normal kind of Christian believer. Or at least you have nothing to say that's decisively kind of different. And therefore sort of you are a plot. But I think sort of my own view of these things is that, look, there is no crisis. The only way you could say there's no crisis, only way that proposition would make any sense to me is it's too late and we're lost.
Oh, yeah.
So it's either that or it's late and we're not lost.
Yeah.
Those are the two options.
Yeah. And I would say that most moderns in the West, they believe there are crises with a small c that pop up here and there. Gas prices are too high. There's war in the Ukraine. Putin's a nut job, whatever. But there's always seems in the minds of most people, it might be a crisis moment, but there's a horizontalist answer to this, a technocratic answer to this. There's going to be a purely intramundane answer to this. Furthermore, it's not necessarily a spiritual provocation. It's not necessarily a moral provocation. And so, we're lost. We're not lost in a sense. We don't feel lost. We feel like, well, we can navigate. There's a crisis, but we can navigate it.
No, I think that's true, and it's true sort of I think in a number of different ways. So, of course, there's going to be acknowledgement of what actual crisis we have at hand, and obviously Putin and so forth. So this whole except so that. But your point is that sort of is the exception, and of course, as an exception, it's not going to demand whole scale attention. In fact, that's precisely the way we respond. We think it's sufficient to acknowledge it. We say, "Oh my God," for a few days. Oh God, and we'll be around the cooler, be talking about it, and then 2 days down. So the war is probably in the 8 months, in the Ukraine. Presumably there is 1 hour, where that emergency, is not felt. And for us, it's an occasional thing. That is the degree to which we're going to pay attention to whatsoever. And in the USA, we're given no incentives not to pay attention to that. But maybe actually we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine in any event. Maybe we should be supporting Putin. What I would say, the other side of what you said, is that we don't understand that we're in spiritual crisis, which is already indicated by the description I've just provided. That is, we moderns, we late moderns, have sort of been formed or misformed into no attention, little or no moral imagination. Despite sort of we want it every which way, we want to be different. We have an anxiety about our difference, but we actually always want things to be the same. Mm. So whatever political platform you have, it makes no difference. You're a radical, you really are not a radical. You want things to be the same. You want the prestige sort of to work in that particular way. If you're the opposite, the same thing, so it's going to apply. So we lack all those things, and then we don't actually pay any attention with respect to that's our problem. Mm. We may have lost Christianity, but we don't know quite what we've lost, or we're losing it, but, we're not going to really lose it. So I'm losing it, but, like everything else, it will come back, right? So it will bounce back. I bounced the ball. It hasn't come back yet, but surely it'll come back in any event, without me doing anything about it, of course, and without me kind of changing the way I look at the world or my investment in the world. The point you made, I think, sort of about that there is a kind sort of progressive, that progress is part sort of, of, shall we say, I think, our subconscious, that somehow or other, the worst that can happen is there's interruption with respect to our progress. Yeah. The climate crisis is not really a crisis, or it is kind of, but, and yeah, we're the people who believe in science, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to be able to we're going to get the carbon out and we're going to put it on the ground. And then, of course, we're going to find out that's going to be a problem as well. But again,
yeah, exactly.
It will be a problem. So, I mean, I have to say that even though, I don't pretend to be an admirer fully of Johann Baptist Metz' theology, I do think he's entirely accurate with respect to the way sort of in which the mentality of the modern, the bourgeois mentality of the modern, is evolutionist. That is, that it's got to do sort of with incremental gains, not non-radical gains, but that sort of is the way sort of in which we have a kind of narcosis, right, with respect sort of to having a kind of moral imagination with respect to those who suffer. He wants, of course, our memory to redeem the past entirely, and I think that's asking us to do the job of Christ, because it seems to me only Christ can redeem the past in a significant way. All we can remember people, but I think we have to remember there's a major distinction between immortality of name and immortality and real immortality. And real immortality is that we have to have an agent who can make alive. And all we can do is we can have an imagination and a memory which makes relevant. I have to say, when I think about sort of, my death or what's going to happen after my death, it may very well be that no one will remember me, and that's going to be the case sort of, with probably most of human beings throughout history, in which case that's the way it is. But the degree to which sort of someone says, well, you're going to be remembered, then with a qualifying clause, kind of, and that should satisfy. Well, it doesn't satisfy. I will not be alive. So I do think that this way in which all of a sudden we insert ourselves as the hero in the story, and now what I need to do is have the heroic memory, not merely to retrieve the past and to put it before us again and say, please pay attention. This might help us along the way. That, I think, is what theology does. But there can be a certain kind of theology that says memory is to redeem the past and to redeem those who are invisible. And look, that's biblical. The invisible should not be ignored. There's a mandate from God. They should not be ignored. Right. But our memory sort of, is, dawdling compared with God's memory. We do not have the power sort of, to resurrect. And the idea sort of that our memory is fully sufficient to do justice to those sort of who live miserable lives in agony and so forth. The idea that we have the power to do that, I almost would want to ask, can we first of all say that rather than write it? And now can we continue to play it back and to see, will we ever gain a conscience as to what we just said?
Yeah.
Well, that is just, that's fascinating. That's good stuff. Rodney, do you have any, we should probably wrap this up very, very, for a lot of reasons, dealing with the length of processing time of the video and that kind of thing. Do you have any final question, Rodney, for Cyril?
I don't actually have any final questions. I think that was a really powerful note to sort of end things.
That's what I thought too.
I do want to say that this has been absolutely enjoyable and thought-provoking and all that. It's great to see you, Cyril. I haven't seen you in a while, and I hope to see you in the flesh, at some point. But it was nice to see you on Zoom, at least.
Thank you, Rodney.
Yeah,
and thank you, Larry. It was very enjoyable, and so hopefully I didn't get too garrulous. But again, once I get going, I don't feel tired. I feel tired later on, but I don't feel tired now at all.
Yeah. That's
and maybe we can do this some other time next year. So we didn't.
Well, I would love to do a follow-up, because I have about 10 more questions swimming in my head. Okay. But I just realized maybe it's just time to just zip it and and move along. Thank you, Cyril. Thank you for watching, and thank you.
All the best. Bye, guys.
See you, Cyril.